At 11:38 p.m., rain stitched silver lines through the cracked roof of the bus shelter on Via Carina, and Ivy Okonkwo stood under the one dry corner with her backpack clutched to her chest, as if the overdue notices inside might dissolve if she loosened her grip. The city bus had already hissed away toward the river, tail lights shrinking into wet darkness, leaving behind the sour diesel smell and a puddle that reflected the amber street lamp in fractured pieces. Her scrubs from St. Bridget's billing office were hidden beneath an old black coat, but exhaustion still clung to her like a second uniform. The ache behind her eyes from staring at claim codes all afternoon, the pinch in her lower back from 10 straight hours at a desk that rocked on one short leg. The hollow bite of hunger she kept quiet because she had half an apple left for tomorrow and no room in this week's budget for impulse. Her phone lit up against her palm. 2 reminders from the dialysis clinic, one from her landlord with the clipped politeness that always sounded like a warning. A missed call from her younger brother, Chimi, time-stamped 10:04, likely to ask whether she could cover a textbook fee he had promised his professor 3 days ago. She closed each notification without opening it fully. Data cost money. Panic cost focus. She had learned to ration both. When she finally stepped out into the rain, water slipped through the seam of her left shoe and chilled her sock in one cold rush. She kept moving, head down, past shuttered bakeries and darkened salon windows, until Belandi's outer wall rose from the night like a private border, pale stone and black iron under floodlights brighter than some city intersections. A camera tracked her approach. The service gate buzzed when she held up her temporary pass, and a guard in a pressed coat nodded once, impersonal, professional, already looking past her to the next vehicle rolling in. Inside the service corridor, the air changed from wet cold to controlled warmth, scented faintly with beeswax and expensive flowers. Marble underfoot, crystal sconces spaced with geometric precision, vintage portraits in gilded frames watching from the walls with the bored confidence of inherited power. Ivy glanced down at the water darkening the hem of her trousers and felt, as she often did here, that she had brought weather into a museum. She checked in at the staff desk at 11:52 p.m., signing the ledger with fingers still stiff from the rain. The house manager, Signora Bellini, didn't look up at first. Her hair was twisted into a severe knot, silver streaks bright under the lamps, and her reading glasses rode low on her nose as she reviewed place settings on a tablet. "You are 9 minutes later than requested," Signora Bellini said. "The bus line was diverted at the bridge," Ivy answered. "I sent a note through dispatch." "Your note used appendix where the document required annex. Precision matters in this house, Miss Okonkwo." The correction landed in front of 2 junior footmen and a pastry assistant carrying a tray of unglazed Petits Fours. No one met Ivy's eyes. The footman resumed polishing stemware with identical motions. The pastry assistant lowered her gaze and moved on. Ivy nodded. Understood. Signora Bellini set down the tablet and gave Ivy the thin smile of someone who believed improvement came only through pressure. "The legal packet is in the blue folder by your station. Translate cleanly. Mr. Belandi wants final language by morning. Mr. Belandi, never Matteo in staff corridors. Never anything personal enough to hold warmth." Ivy took the folder and walked to the narrow translation room off the silver pantry. A converted office with one small desk, an aging desktop monitor, and a printer that jammed whenever humidity climbed. She hung her coat, wrung rainwater from her sleeve into the sink, and sat. Her knees trembled once. From fatigue or cold, she couldn't separate anymore. The first page was dense with acquisition clauses, jurisdiction language, and the kind of legal phrasing designed to conceal sharp edges under neutral verbs. She switched between Italian and English, cross-checking terms line by line, hearing her old university professor in her head. Accuracy is respect. Ambiguity is risk. At 12:17 a.m., she opened the lunch container she had carried untouched since morning. The bruised apple had gone soft on one side. She cut away the brown part with a plastic knife, ate the rest in 4 slow bites, and drank lukewarm water from the staff cooler. Across the room, the blue glow of the monitor sharpened the shadows under her eyes in the blackened window reflection. By 12:31 a.m., the house above her had moved into the final cadence of late dinner. Cutlery chime fading, low voices passing through vents, the distant glide of a piano recording from the main salon. Wealth had its own soundproof rhythms, she thought, built on hidden labor and smooth transitions no guest ever noticed. Down here, she tracked every minute in practical units. 32 euros due for her mother's transport to Friday treatment, 68 short on rent, 120 needed before Monday to keep the electric meter from another warning cycle. She opened her banking app and watched the loading wheel spin against an almost empty balance. Her thumb hovered over a transfer option that would pull from the small emergency fund she had sworn not to touch again. That fund had once bought her out of a dangerous lease. It had once paid legal filing fees she never got back. It had once represented the difference between choosing and being cornered. Now it sat at 146 euros and 20 cents, a number so small it looked accidental. She locked the phone and returned to the contract. At 12:46 a.m., Signora Bellini appeared in the doorway, with a tray of untouched espresso cups and 2 crystal glasses clouded with melted ice. Dining room annex. Now. Ivy rose at once and followed, carrying her notebook and dictionary because the donor from Marseille had requested live interpretation for a side discussion. The dining room was almost empty when she entered. Long table gleaming beneath chandelier light, white linen still perfect despite the finished meal. 3 men remained, jackets buttoned, voices lowered. Matteo Belandi stood near the fireplace, tailored dark suit immaculate, one hand resting on the back of a chair as he listened to a man with cufflinks shaped like tiny ships. His presence altered the room without movement. Staff adjusted posture when he looked up. Ivy took her place 2 steps behind Signora Bellini, where service protocol put contractors. Visible when needed, invisible by default. The donor with ship cufflinks glanced over and smiled with expensive ease that never reached his eyes. "Your translator?" Signora Bellini answered before Ivy could speak. "Yes, sir. Miss Okonkwo. From San Rocco district, isn't she?" The donor swirled the last amber in his glass. "Remarkable. Girls from her neighborhood should be grateful to polish silver in a house like this." The comment came lightly, almost playful, the way cruelty often arrived in polished rooms, framed as observation, delivered as hierarchy. Ivy kept her face neutral, fingers tightening around her notebook until the cardboard edge pressed into her palm. She looked toward Matteo once, involuntary, not asking rescue, only checking whether he had heard. He had. His gaze settled on her, unreadable. "Miss Okonkwo," he said, voice low and clipped. "Translate Article 12. Precisely. Distance, formal and absolute. No public correction for the donor, no acknowledgement of the slight, just work." "Yes, Mr. Belandi." She translated the clause on cross-border asset recovery without stumbling, even when her throat felt narrow and her pulse drummed too high in her ears. By the time the donor left, escorted through the front gallery, Ivy had converted 26 lines of legal language and swallowed down the hot sting behind her eyes so completely she almost believed she felt nothing. At 1:03 a.m., she returned to the pantry office and found 1 new voicemail from the dialysis center. The nurse spoke gently, professionally, as if kindness could soften arithmetic. They needed confirmation of payment by noon tomorrow to hold her mother's preferred slot. If not, reassignment might occur. Reassignment meant a longer trip across town and another transport fee Ivy did not have. She replayed the message twice, then copied the payment code into her notebook, underlining it in red. Next to it, she wrote a list in block letters: rent partial, clinic deposit, bus pass top-up, Chima textbook. The list looked like an accusation in her own handwriting. Rain intensified beyond the service windows, harder now, drumming the narrow skylight above the corridor. Somewhere upstairs, a clock chimed once, then once again after a pause, announcing the quarter hour in a tone so rich it sounded like a concert note. Ivy pressed her fingers to her temples, breathed in for 4 counts, out for 6, and returned to page 9. Her translation was clean. Her punctuation held. Her margins were tidy. Competence was the one thing no one had managed to take from her. At 1:12 a.m., she printed the final draft and fed it into a blue presentation folder marked for morning signature. She stacked reference pages, wiped her station, and packed her backpack with ritual order: laptop, dictionary, charger. The envelope of notices she still hadn't opened. At the bottom, wrapped in a sock beneath spare pens, lay the thin emergency pouch containing 40 euros in cash and a worn passport she carried even on ordinary nights because uncertainty had trained her better than optimism ever could. Before she shut the bag, her phone lit one more time with a text from her mother. Simple and unadorned, despite the hour. "You home yet, baby? Don't skip dinner again." Ivy stared at the message until the screen dimmed, then typed back with steady hands she did not feel. "Almost done. I ate. Sleep, Mama. I'll call before your appointment." She sent it, shouldered the backpack, and stood in the narrow office listening to rain hammer marble and glass while the Belandi estate settled around her in layers of money, protocol, and locked doors. And for the first time that night, she admitted what her body had been saying for hours. She was one unpaid bill away from losing control of more than a schedule. The corridor outside the pantry office felt narrower than it had an hour earlier, as if the walls had inched closer while she translated. Ivy adjusted the strap of her backpack, tucked the blue folder against her ribs, and stepped into the service lane that led toward the night clerk's station. Her legs were heavy, calves tight from standing and rushing between desks all day, and the dry air of the estate made her throat sting after the rain. She told herself the routine was simple: submit the file, sign out, catch the first municipal line at dawn, and sleep for 90 minutes before calling the clinic. She had reached the turn toward the ledger desk when Signora Bellini appeared from the opposite corridor, heels striking marble in quick, exact beats. "Miss Okonkwo?" "Not yet." Ivy stopped. "The final translation is complete. I reviewed your formatting notes. Mr. Belandi requires oral summary in the winter salon now. Counsel from Zurich is still on video. You will interpret on record." "It's 1:13, Ivy said before she could hide the fatigue in her voice. Signora Bellini's expression did not shift. "And still tonight. Smoothly, please." The winter salon sat above the courtyard with 2-story windows and a ceiling painted in muted constellations. Even at that hour, crystal lamps burned in low amber pools, touching polished wood, ivory drapes, and the narrow silver frame of the monitor where 3 attorneys waited from a bright conference room abroad. Matteo stood near the mantel, jacket on, tie loosened half an inch in a way that looked less casual than tactical. 2 men from his finance team sat at the oval table with open binders and espresso cups that had gone untouched. When Ivy entered, one of them looked up, eyes dropping to her rain-marked shoes and then to the backpack strap crossing her coat. "Service staff in the salon?" Matteo did not look at the speaker. His gaze remained on Ivy. Leave your bag by the door, Miss Okonkwo. Begin with Article 12, Annex Language and Enforceability. The command was clipped, professional, and it hit her in the same place as the donor's remark had hit. Not like cruelty, not like kindness, just the reminder that she was a function in a room built for other people's authority. She set the backpack by the inner wall where she could still see it, opened the folder, and took her position beside the screen. Her pulse thudded behind her ears while she translated line by line, then answered cross questions from the Zurich team without pausing to search for terms. She rendered liability clauses, tax exposure, and jurisdiction carve-outs in precise legal cadence. Switching languages so fast, her mouth went dry between sentences. At one point, the younger finance man interrupted with a thin smile. Your accent flattens the distinction between collateral and guarantee. That can get expensive. Ivy kept her eyes on the document. In my rendering, collateral is tied to asset seizure under Clause 8. Guarantee is personal undertaking under Clause 9. They are separate in both versions. You can verify against the red line. A beat of silence followed. Matteo turned one page in his binder, then another. She is correct, he said without inflection. Proceed. The man's smile vanished. Signora Bellini, stationed by the doorway with a tablet, gave Ivy a look that was not approval and not disapproval, only assessment, as if she were deciding whether competence might become a maintenance problem. By 1:24 a.m., rain hammered the salon windows hard enough to blur the garden lights into streaks. Ivy had been standing without moving for nearly 40 minutes, shoulder blades burning, and the hollow in her stomach had sharpened into nausea. A housemaid slipped in with fresh coffee and warm rolls on a lacquer tray meant for the table. The yeasty smell reached Ivy and then moved past her. No one offered her a cup. She did not ask. In rooms like this, hunger belonged to staff corridors, not negotiation spaces. The Zurich Council requested a final confirmation paragraph. Ivy read it in Italian, translated it into English, then back-translated a disputed sentence to prove equivalence. When she finished, one of the attorneys nodded into the camera and ended the call. The monitor dimmed to black. Matteo closed his binder and finally looked at her fully, dark eyes unreadable under the low lamp. Upload your final version to Legal Archive and print 2 hard copies for morning signature. Yes, Mr. Belandi. He held her gaze 1 second longer, as if checking whether she would sway where she stood. Bellini. Ensure transport for Miss Okonkwo at shift end. Signora Bellini inclined her head. Of course, sir. The words landed strangely. Transport meant a house car instead of the bus. A small mercy that still moved through protocol instead of concern. Ivy nodded once, gathered the papers, and crossed the salon to retrieve her backpack. Her hand had just touched the strap when the younger finance man spoke behind her, quieter now but still audible. She handles pressure better than most associates. Signora Bellini answered in a tone dry as pressed linen. She is temporary. Ivy kept walking. In the service pantry, she sent the final file to archive, printed 2 copies, and sealed each in cream envelopes with gold-edged tabs. Her fingers trembled only when the printer stalled on page 6 and she had to clear the jam by hand. She checked the clock on the wall above the sink. 1:31 a.m. Her phone battery sat at 12%. She opened her banking app one more time and then closed it before the numbers could settle in her chest. Rent, clinic, bus fare, Chima's text fee. The arithmetic kept returning, relentless, each line item a small hand pulling at her sleeve. A soft knock sounded on the pantry door. It was Layla, one of the pastry assistants, apron dusted with flour and eyes rimmed with fatigue. She held a wrapped napkin in both hands. Kitchen's closed, but I saved this before cleanup. Inside was half a plain roll and a wedge of mild cheese. Ivy stared at it, throat tight. You'll get in trouble. Layla shrugged. Only if someone asks. Her mouth curved in a quick, tired smile. Eat in the corridor camera blind spot. 2 minutes. The kindness was so ordinary and so rare that Ivy had to look down before she answered. Thank you. She ate standing by the linen closet where the camera angle missed the corner by a meter. Chewing slowly despite the urgency, letting the bread settle the acid in her stomach. When she finished, she folded the napkin into a square and slipped it into her pocket to throw away outside. The estate had 1,000 rules about silver polish and flour rotation, but unofficial survival ran on tiny acts like this. A hidden roll, a warning glance, a door held open half a second longer. By 1:40 a.m., most of the guest wing had gone dark, and the house shifted into its thinner nighttime rhythm of muted footsteps, distant elevator hum, and security radios cracking softly at intervals. That was when the second texture of the night began. Ivy carried the sealed envelopes to the staff desk at the service junction and signed the transfer ledger. The valet on duty, Paolo, stood beside the key cabinet checking return tags, and for the first time since she had known him, his hands shook visibly. Paolo was a former military driver in his 50s, famous among staff for folding pocket squares with ruler precision and never spilling a drop while opening champagne in moving cars. Tonight, he dropped a brass key fob twice before catching it. A fine line of sweat shone along his hairline, though the corridor was cool. You all right? Ivy asked quietly. Paolo glanced up, then over his shoulder toward the camera dome. Long shift, he said too quickly. Storm pressure. His voice sat wrong in his throat, thin where it should have been steady. He slid the key into the cabinet and closed the glass door with more force than needed. Ivy followed his glance to the staff monitor wall, where 4 camera feeds showed the courtyard, the delivery lane, the rear gate, and the service stairwell. All normal. Rain slanting white under floodlights, empty stone paths. Then every screen cut to black at once. No static, no distortion, just sudden dark. 1 second, 2, 3. Ivy counted without meaning to, pulse kicking harder with each beat. 4, 5, 6, 7. The feeds returned in perfect sync, same angles, same rain, same empty paths, as if the interruption had never happened. At the desk, the night clerk swore under his breath and reached for his radio. Control, confirm visual dropout at Junction Monitor Bank. Duration 7 seconds. Request system check. A burst of static answered, then a voice. Received. Running diagnostics. Paolo's hand tightened around the edge of the counter until his knuckles blanched. Ivy felt a prickle move up the back of her neck. 7 seconds was short enough to dismiss, long enough to use. The night clerk forced a laugh that did not carry. Old wiring hates weather. Paolo gave no answer. Ivy signed out of document custody and turned toward the corridor that led to the staff dormitory rooms used by overnight contractors. Her room was small, temporary, and usually forgettable. Narrow bed, metal wardrobe, 1 lamp with a yellow shade. Tonight, the hallway outside it held an oppressive stillness that made every small sound stand out. The drip from her coat hem, the ticking pipe behind the wall, the distant slam of a service door 2 floors above. As she approached, she noticed her door sat not fully closed, but resting against the frame, latch barely engaged. She was meticulous about locks, always had been. She stopped 2 steps away, listening. Nothing from inside. No movement, no rustle, no breath. only rain striking the high window at the end of the hall in hard diagonal bursts. "Housekeeping?" she called, keeping her voice neutral. No response. She pushed the door with 2 fingers. The room opened into dim lamplight and complete order. Bed made, wardrobe shut, her old scarf still draped over the chair back where she had left it. She crossed to the sink, checked beneath it out of habit, then turned to the desk. Her notebook sat where she had left it. But something new lay on top. A folded valet ticket, cream cardstock edged in gold, the Belandi crest stamped in one corner. Ivy did not touch it at first. She knew that ticket type from the front drive, where guests claimed cars after galas. This one had been folded twice, then once again, the crease sharp and deliberate. Her name was written on the outside in blue ink, not printed, not staff block letters. Handwriting slanted right, confident, each loop closed tight. Her throat closed before she opened it, because she recognized that script even after 2 years. Inside, there was one line. "You don't get to disappear from me twice." Underneath, signed with a smooth, almost elegant flourish, Caleb Nwosu. The signature burned through her like a fever, not because it was loud, but because it was so controlled. Caleb's handwriting had always looked careful enough for bank forms and church guest books. The script of a man who knew how to perform trust while he measured where to press hardest. Ivy kept staring at the folded ticket until the edges blurred, then forced herself to breathe through her nose and set it flat on the desk instead of crushing it in her fist. Panic wanted motion without direction. Survival demanded sequence. She checked the wardrobe first, then under the bed, then behind the bathroom door. Empty. She slid open the metal desk drawer and took out a transparent document sleeve left over from translation packets, lifted the valet ticket by its corner, and sealed it inside. Her fingers shook anyway. In the mirror above the sink, her face looked older than 28. Rain-frayed curls escaping her braid, dark circles sharpened by yellow lamplight. She pulled her backpack closer, unzipped the bottom compartment, and removed the old power bank she never used. Beneath it sat a strip of black tape against the inner seam, and a second phone no one in the house knew she carried. The burner's battery read 68%. Enough. She opened a folder labeled only with a date and checked each attachment one more time. The audio file of Caleb telling her he would fix the divorce timeline when she stopped playing proud, screenshots of transfers from accounts she had never authorized, the affidavit she had paid a notary for with her grocery money 2 weeks ago, and photos of the bruises she had documented without sending to anyone. Then she opened the contact chain. Belandi security intake, marked internal priority. Nora Adebayo, freelance investigations desk. Federal Financial Crimes Prosecutor Office, witness portal plus direct encrypted address. She had built the packet across 3 sleepless nights, never fully certain she would use it, and now she set the trigger time for 6:05 a.m. with one condition. If she entered a cancellation code before then, nothing would go out. If she did nothing, all recipients would receive everything simultaneously. Her thumb hovered over confirm. The room was silent except for rain and the brittle hum of the lamp. She confirmed. A small gray notice appeared. Scheduled dispatch active. Only then did she allow herself to sit on the edge of the bed for 5 seconds and press both palms against her knees until the trembling eased. The 7-second camera blackout replayed in her mind beside Paolo's shaking hands and that polished loop of handwriting. Caleb did not bluff with theater alone. He preferred pressure points, paperwork, appearances, legal traps that felt too boring to fear until they closed. If he was inside Belandi perimeter, someone had opened a lane for him or looked away at the right minute. The thought made her skin prickle. At 2:03 a.m., she sent one ordinary text to her brother from her regular phone. "If I call before dawn, answer on first ring. No questions first, just answer." She added a heart at the end because he would panic if she sounded formal, then deleted it and sent the plain version instead. She moved fast after that. Passport from the hidden pouch, emergency cash from the lining of her backpack, 2 changes of clothes rolled tight, clinic paperwork for her mother, the envelope of overdue notices she had been avoiding, because leaving without them would not erase what they demanded. The hard-shell suitcase clicked shut with a sound too sharp for the small room. She stood still, listening for footsteps in the corridor, and heard none. By 3:10 a.m., the rain had thinned from hard sheets to a cold mist tapping the service windows. Ivy wheeled the suitcase through the back hall, avoiding the central junction where monitors were visible, and reached the servants' gate just as a pale seam of pre-dawn light edged the east wall. The gate was still locked from inside protocol. Contractors leaving before shift change needed a guard release. She set the suitcase upright beside the iron bars and pressed the intercom once. Static. Then, state name and clearance. Miss Okonkwo, translation contractor. Early release request. A pause followed, longer than normal. Wait for supervisor clearance. She wrapped her arms around herself and watched mist collect on the suitcase handle. Her left wrist still remembered Caleb's grip from 2 years earlier. A phantom ache where the skin had healed, but trust had not. She checked the time. 5:41. 24 minutes until dispatch. Footsteps sounded behind her, measured and unhurried. She turned and found Matteo Belandi, crossing the stone path from the inner court. No overcoat despite the cold, black suit jacket buttoned, expression carved into stillness that made most people step back without being told. He looked at the suitcase first, then at her face, then at the gate panel. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Out," Ivy said. "Now." He pressed a remote in his hand. The gate's locking bolts engaged with a metallic snap that echoed along the corridor, sealing the bars instead of opening them. Ivy's breath caught, anger flaring so fast it almost steadied her. "You can't do that." "I just did." His voice stayed low, barely contained. "Sit down." "I'm not your prisoner." "No." He stepped closer, rain mist beating on his shoulders. "You are a woman with a suitcase at dawn after an internal camera dropout and an unauthorized entry marker on estate stock. Sit down." The command struck her like a wall, because he was right about the details, wrong about the method, and she did not have time for either. "He's here," she said. "Caleb Nwosu. I have evidence in motion. At 6:05, that evidence leaves my control." Something shifted behind his eyes. Not surprise exactly, more a hard recalculation. "Show me." She took the document sleeve from her coat pocket and handed it over. He scanned the note once, jaw tightening at the signature. When he looked up, the distance he kept in formal rooms had vanished, replaced by precision. He touched his earpiece. "Security chief to servants' court. Full team. Now." He returned the sleeve. "Sit." Ivy lowered herself onto the stone bench by the wall because standing made her legs feel unreliable. She kept one hand on her suitcase handle, the other around her phone. Within 90 seconds, the security chief arrived with 2 guards and a medic trailing with a compact trauma bag. Orders moved in clipped chains across radios. Perimeter audit, delivery lane closure, camera log pull, gate 3 manual check. Staff began appearing at corridor ends in uniforms and kitchen whites, pretending errands while watching openly. At 5:59 a.m., Matteo turned to her. "You said 6:05. "Yes." "Is it cancelable?" "Yes. Until 6:05 with a code." "Good." The word startled her. He did not elaborate. At 6:04, a delivery van rolled toward the half-open service lane despite the closure call. One guard raised a hand to stop it. The van halted, rear doors still shut. From the passenger side, Caleb stepped down in a pressed charcoal suit and polished shoes untouched by mud, as if he had arrived for a board meeting instead of a breach. He smiled when he saw Ivy, the smile he used in public when he wanted witnesses to doubt their own instincts. "There she is," he called, voice carrying across gravel and stone. "Nkem, you run all this way and don't even call?" The old pet name hit like a slap. Around them, drivers, guards, and 2 house staff froze in place, drawn by tone before content. Humiliation was one of Caleb's first tools. Make it public, make it confusing, make her look irrational if she resisted. Ivy stood because sitting felt too exposed now. "Don't call me that." He spread his hands, still smiling. "I've been patient. She took my money, gentlemen, my documents, my dignity." His gaze flicked to Matteo with practiced civility. "Mr. Belandi, I'm sure you value honesty among your employees. She is not available to you," Matteo said. Caleb ignored him and walked 3 steps forward, stopping just outside the nearest guard's reach as if he had measured the exact legal threshold. "Come home, Ivy. We can settle this privately." "We are not discussing private anything," she said, louder than she felt. Her pulse hammered so hard her vision narrowed at the edges. "You forged loans in my name." A murmur moved through the watching staff. Caleb's smile thinned. He closed the distance in a sudden glide and caught her wrist, fingers clamping hard enough to blanch the skin. "Lower your voice," he said, still smiling for the audience. "You're tired. You make dramatic claims when you're tired." Pain flashed up her arm, bright and immediate. She did not pull back first. She looked directly at him and spoke clearly, each word clipped for witnesses and microphones alike. "Release me." He held 1 second longer, then let go as the nearest guard stepped in. White fingerprints bloomed on her wrist. At 6:05, her burner dispatched. 3 tones sounded almost at once from different devices. The security chief's tablet, Matteo's phone, and Ivy's regular handset confirming outgoing transfer complete. Caleb heard them too. His gaze snapped from her wrist to her face, calculation stripping the charm clean away. "What did you send?" he asked softly. "The truth," she said. For the first time, uncertainty cracked his composure. He reached inside his coat, and every guard shifted. Ivy saw matte black metal appear, compact and real. Instead of aiming outward, Caleb pressed the pistol against his own throat just below the jawline. Angle wrong for bluff and close enough to chill the entire courtyard into stillness. "No one moves," he said, voice suddenly loud. "She retracts everything now, or I die right here and she carries that on every channel by noon. Then we discuss who goes with me." Ivy's breath broke. Sound receded to rain ticks and her own heartbeat. Her knees locked, her fingers went numb around the phone. Staff at the corridor mouth gasped and were pulled back by a guard. The medic crouched instinctively, bag unzipped. Caleb's hand trembled once, then steadied with sheer will and rage. Matteo stepped forward onto the gravel. Controlled movement, shoulders squared but unhurried. Dark gaze fixed on Caleb's right hand. When he spoke, his voice dropped into tactical cadence that cut through panic like a blade. "Perimeter seal. Gate 3 manual lock. Sniper eyes on his right hand. Medic forward to pillar cover. Bolt cutters staged. Now." Radios answered in quick bursts. Boots moved at the edges of vision. 2 guards shifted left to clear line of sight. Another pulled the delivery lane barrier shut. The security chief raised one hand, fingers counting down silent positions. Matteo did not look at Ivy, but his next words were for her. "Stay behind me. Do not speak." She tried to answer and could not. Her throat had closed to a narrow ache. She stepped back anyway, each movement deliberate, and felt the cold surface of armored glass at the side alcove against her shoulder as a guard guided her into partial cover. Warm wool settled over her shoulders a moment later. Someone had wrapped a blanket around her without her noticing. Caleb laughed once, brittle and high. "You think this is a negotiation? She is my wife." Ivy forced air into her lungs. "Legal papers were delayed by fraud," she said, voice shaking but audible. "You know that." "Quiet," he snapped, pressure increasing at his own throat. A bead of sweat tracked down his temple despite the cold. The security chief flicked his gaze toward Mateo, then toward a maintenance cart parked near the hedge. One guard nudged the cart with his boot. A metal tray clattered to stone, loud and sudden. Caleb flinched toward the noise by reflex, muzzle angle shifting 2 inches off center. In the same instant, the chief moved, fast, low, decisive, closing distance and driving Caleb's wrist outward while a second guard secured his elbow. The pistol hit gravel, skidded, and stopped beneath the cartwheel. "Weapon clear," a guard shouted. Caleb struggled, shouting words that dissolved into static and rain as cuffs clicked around his wrists. No one struck him after that. The force ended where control began. Ivy didn't realize she was shaking until the trauma nurse touched her elbow and said, "You're safe enough to sit." Her legs gave way onto a bench behind the glass partition. The nurse checked her pupils, pulse, and wrist marks with practiced calm, then tucked the blanket tighter and handed her a cup of warm water that smelled faintly of lemon. Ivy held it in both hands because one hand alone would have spilled it. Across the courtyard, Mateo gave 3 more orders in quick succession. Legal counsel on site within the hour. Protective status filing initiated immediately. All staff witness statements collected before shift rotation. The security chief bagged the pistol, photographed chain of custody, and logged the valet ticket Ivy had submitted from the sleeve, evidence number spoken aloud for recording. Paolo was escorted to internal interview without handcuffs, face gray after admitting he had accepted money to leave a service lane protocol unchecked. The 7-second blackout was tied to a manual loop insertion from his terminal. Distinctive details, finally named. 3 days of fear compressed into one cold morning and began, at last, to take formal shape. When the courtyard cleared and sirens faded beyond the estate wall, Mateo walked back to the servants' gate, where Ivy's suitcase still stood upright, rain beating on the shell. He unlocked the bars, then locked them again, after checking both directions of the lane, as if drawing a perimeter she could see. He came to the bench and lowered his voice. No audience now, no performance left. "Sit down, Ivy." She was already sitting, blanket around her shoulders, warm cup trembling in her hands. But this time the words landed differently. Not a cage, not permission, just a line held against chaos while her breathing found a steady rhythm again. The nurse waited until Ivy's breathing evened out, then crouched in front of her and spoke in the calm, practical tone used in emergency rooms when fear had to be broken into tasks. Name, date of birth, and what hurts most right now. Ivy Okonkwo, March 12th. Wrist. Her voice came out rough. And my chest feels tight. From shock, the nurse said. Stay with me. She checked Ivy's pupils with a pen light, counted pulse at her neck, and wrapped a blood pressure cuff around her arm, while another guard held the blanket closed at her shoulders to keep the cold off her skin. The cuff hissed and released. Pressure elevated but stable. No head strike, no loss of consciousness? No. Good. Sip the water slowly, not all at once. Across the gravel, Mateo was still in command mode, the cold morning air sharpening every word. No one enters or exits without dual authorization. Lock down staff devices pending witness intake. Pull corridor audio for the last 90 minutes. I want the server room sealed until forensic imaging is complete. He listened to a radio response, then added, and called Judge Ferraro's office. Emergency protective filing. I want timestamp confirmation, not a voicemail. He turned to the security chief, who was kneeling near the maintenance cart with an evidence kit open. Chain of custody. Weapon tagged, photographed, and secured. The chief replied. Valet ticket logged. Camera loop extraction in progress. Paolo signed initial admission. Full statement pending counsel. Get counsel present for him and for her. Mateo's gaze shifted toward Ivy, then back to the chief. She gives testimony once, on record, with her terms respected. Do you understand me? Yes, sir. The phrase that followed was quieter, but it carried farther than the orders. No shortcuts. By 6:32 a.m., the courtyard had become a controlled grid. Yellow markers sat near the dropped pistol and Caleb's shoe scuff by the lane. 2 uniformed officers from municipal response stood just beyond the gate with a Belandi legal liaison, signing transfer paperwork while rain mist drifted under the floodlights in thin silver sheets. Staff who had witnessed the scene were escorted one by one to a side corridor for statements, each escorted by protocol officers with tablets and printed forms. The morning shift that should have begun with deliveries and inventory now moved around sealed tape and lowered voices. Ivy watched it through armored glass, fingers stiff around the paper cup. Her body had started to shake less, but fatigue hit in deep waves, each one heavier than the last. She had been awake since yesterday morning. Hunger returned in a sudden drop that made her lightheaded. The nurse noticed and opened a foil packet from her kit. Glucose gel first, then food. Tiny amounts. She squeezed a portion onto a wooden stick and held it out. You did well. You're still doing well. Ivy swallowed the sweetness and tasted lemon and metal. My phone? A guard placed both her regular phone and the burner in a clear tray on the bench beside her. Security cloned the packet metadata only. Your original devices remain with you unless law enforcement serves a warrant. Mateo came to the glass alcove then, still composed, rain beating at his cuffs. You will move to the secure library for formal intake. Nurse goes with you. 2 guards in front, 2 behind. Your suitcase comes too. I don't need to be hidden, Ivy said. This isn't hiding. It's perimeter discipline. His tone stayed controlled, but a muscle jumped once in his jaw. You were targeted inside my walls. She held his gaze. I won't sign anything half-conscious. You won't sign anything without counsel. He paused. Independent counsel, if you choose. That landed where panic had been, creating a narrow strip of ground she could stand on. Ivy nodded once. Then I move when I text my mother. Mateo looked at the nurse, then at the guard with the tray. Give her privacy at visual range. The guard stepped back to the edge of the alcove, facing outward. Ivy typed with cold fingers. I'm safe. Delay clinic pickup. I'll call in 20. Do not open the door for anyone. Love you. Her mother replied in under 10 seconds with 3 words that made Ivy's throat ache. Call me, please. She sent a second message to Chima. It happened. I'm safe. Keep Mama inside. If unknown number calls, record details and hang up. Before she locked the screen, new notifications began to stack from the timed packet she had sent at 6:05. Belandi security intake. Receipt confirmed. Nora Adebayo. Got it. Verifying now. Don't answer unknown numbers. Federal Witness Portal. Submission ID issued. A minute later, another secure message appeared from the prosecutor's office requesting immediate preservation of original files and offering a protected interview slot that morning. External pressure was no longer just private terror. It had entered systems with timestamps. The move to the library happened in under 2 minutes. The route cut through a service lift normally used for antique deliveries, then into a corridor lined with old maps and locked cabinets. The secure library itself was larger than Ivy expected, less decorative than the salons upstairs, built for containment rather than display. Reinforced windows faced an inner court. A long walnut table sat beneath warm pendant lights. One wall held legal volumes, another held monitors now dark except for a single live feed of the outer gate. There was no chandelier, no music, no performance, only controlled quiet. Signora Bellini stood by a sideboard with a tray of food arranged with unnerving precision. Broth, plain rice, sliced pears, black tea, and a small dish of salt crackers. Her posture remained formal, but her voice had lost its edge. The nurse asked for gentle options. Ivy sat slowly in the nearest chair, knees unsteady. "Thank you." Bellini inclined her head. "A change of dry clothes is available in the adjoining washroom. Your suitcase has been screened and placed inside. If anything is missing, report it directly to me." She hesitated, then added, "No one enters this room without your consent except medical personnel." It was the closest thing to an apology Ivy had ever heard from her. Matteo stayed by the door while the nurse rechecked Ivy's wrist, applied a cool compress to the pressure marks, and taped a thin sensor patch near her collarbone to monitor heart rate variability through the next hour. "You're in acute stress response," the nurse said. "Not weakness, biology. Eat 3 spoons of broth now." Ivy obeyed, then another 2 spoons, then tea. Warmth returned to her hands in increments. She changed into dry clothes from her suitcase, gray sweater, black trousers, and returned to find 3 new arrivals at the table. A woman in a navy suit with a legal badge clipped to her lapel, a man from Belandi Compliance with a sealed laptop, and a municipal officer assigned to witness protection intake. The attorney introduced herself first. "Elena Voss. You are not my client unless you choose that. Mr. Belandi requested immediate availability and agreed on record that you may refuse representation and select anyone else. I am here to explain options, not pressure decisions." Ivy sat down, absorbing the wording. "And if I choose someone else?" "I help preserve your rights until they arrive." Elena slid a 1-page document across the table. "This is a temporary legal shield. No direct contact from Caleb or his agents, no private negotiation requests, and mandatory routing through counsel. It can be filed within the hour." Matteo spoke from the door, voice low. "File it." Ivy looked at him. "I'll decide after I read." A beat passed. Then he nodded. "After you read." That was the first moment she believed this room might not become another kind of trap. The compliance officer opened the sealed laptop and projected a chain of evidence dashboard onto the wall screen. File names from Ivy's packet appeared with exact upload times, cryptographic hashes, and recipient confirmations. The prosecutor's office had already issued a hold order for financial records tied to 2 shell lenders Ivy recognized. Nora Adebayo had sent one more message asking permission to publish only after charges were formalized. Belandi Security had flagged 7 calls placed to Paolo over the last week from a prepaid number now linked to Caleb's assistant. Distinctive details were becoming structure. The municipal officer took a statement about immediate risk factors, then asked if Ivy had anywhere secure to stay outside the estate. She gave her apartment address, then shook her head before he finished typing. He knows that location. He has keys from the old lease period. Then it is no longer viable, the officer said. We can place patrol presence and arrange temporary secure housing. Mateo stepped forward. She chooses the location. My team only transports. Ivy looked between them. I want neutral ground. Not this house, not my apartment. Elena Voss nodded. That can be done today? Silence settled after the officer left to process forms. The nurse cleared the tray, leaving tea within reach. Bellini exited with the empty dishes. The compliance officer moved to the far end of the room to prepare document copies. For the first time since the courtyard, only Ivy and Mateo remained near the center table, with 2 guards outside the closed door and no one else close enough to interrupt. Mateo loosened his cuff as if the fabric had turned rigid against his wrist. You said in the courtyard he is still your legal husband. Ivy stared at the rim of her cup. Because he made sure of it. She lifted her eyes. I filed for divorce 18 months ago. He delayed service twice by changing registered addresses, then filed procedural objections using a private attorney I couldn't afford to fight. Every delay gave him time to open debt lines in my name. Medical loans, vehicle credit, a business guarantee I never signed. Her mouth tightened. He had copies of my old documents from when we lived together. He practiced my signature. How much debt? On paper? $211,000 across 6 instruments. Real exposure is lower if fraud is proven, but until then, it sits on my record like a verdict. She swallowed. When my mother's kidney function dropped, he offered to help with clinic transfers if I stopped pushing the divorce. That was the price. Dependence. Controlled rage hardened Mateo's face, but he said nothing yet. Ivy continued because stopping would mean shaking again. He never had to hit me in front of people. He used timing. Locked me out of accounts the day rent cleared, called my manager with concern in his voice and questions about my mental stability. Sent flowers after threatening messages so I looked dramatic if I reported him. She rubbed the faint white marks on her wrist. The bruises were private. The paperwork was public. That was his pattern. She reached into her sweater pocket and placed a thin silver ring on the table. Plain, worn at the edge. I kept this because I thought courts liked symbols of good faith. I wore it to hearings so no one would call me bitter. A short, humorless breath escaped her. It bought me nothing. Mateo looked at the ring, but did not touch it. Why didn't you bring this to my legal team sooner? Because men with compounds and rules don't usually help women like me without writing the help in invisible ink. The answer came flat, not defiant, just exhausted truth. And because your version of protection looked like locked gates before it looked like consent, the words held between them. And when Mateo finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she had heard all morning. You are right about that. He rolled his left cuff higher. A narrow scar crossed the inside of his wrist, pale and jagged, disappearing beneath the watch strap. My sister died in a hallway with 3 neighbors listening through their doors, he said. Police report called it a domestic dispute pending review. Pending review became delay. Delay became burial. His gaze stayed on the scar, not on Ivy. I was 22. I arrived 6 minutes too late because I believed protocol would hold until I got there. Ivy felt the room shift, not toward softness, but toward context that had been missing. He was charged? She asked. Eventually, not for what mattered most. Mateo lowered his sleeve with precise fingers. Since then, When I see escalation, I lock down first and explain after. It keeps people alive. It also turns me into something close to what I hate if I don't check myself. He met her eyes then, steady and unsparing. Today, I am checking myself. The admission did not erase the gate snap or the command in his voice, but it reframed the shape of it. Under the control was grief that had calcified into procedure, loyalty translated into walls and rapid logistics because tenderness had once arrived too late. Ivy leaned back in the chair, heart still tender from adrenaline. I won't trade Caleb's cage for yours. You won't. The answer came without pause. Any protection I provide will be documented, revocable, and witnessed. You keep your own accounts, your own counsel, and your own keys. She studied him for signs of performance and found none she could read. Only exhaustion, restraint, and that same disciplined fury turned now toward systems rather than spectacle. Outside the reinforced window, morning had fully arrived. Gray light flattening the inner court stones. Inside, the secure library held its controlled warmth. Tea cooling between Ivy's hands, legal forms waiting at the edge of the table like the next necessary step instead of a threat. When Elena Voss returned with 2 witness copies and a neutral housing authorization packet. Ivy straightened her shoulders, uncapped the pen, and began reading every line aloud before she signed. She finished the last clause, read the liability language aloud one more time, and signed with a hand that still trembled at the knuckles, but no longer drifted off the line. Elena Voss initialed as witness, then slid a second copy to Matteo. Ivy watched him instead of the paper. This one too, she said. The household boundary agreement. Elena glanced up. Miss Okonkwo, that document is voluntary for the principal. It is not required for the filing. It is required for me. Matteo took the page, read every line without rushing, and uncapped the pen. The agreement was blunt by design. No movement restrictions without immediate documented threat. No retention of personal documents. No surveillance access to her private devices. No legal communication routed through Belandi Council without her written consent, and no relocation without destination disclosure. He signed, dated, and pushed the paper back across the walnut table. Ivy did not touch it yet. Add one more line, she said. Elena looked between them. What line? If a security decision affects me directly, I get the reason within 15 minutes, unless medical emergency makes that impossible. She paused, then corrected herself. Unless medical emergency makes that unsafe. Not impossible. Matteo gave a short nod. Add it. Elena typed, printed, and returned. Ivy read the new line aloud, then signed again. The compliance officer logged the revision, attached chain numbers, and sealed both copies in transparent sleeves. Only then did Ivy exhale fully, as if the room had finally given her enough oxygen to think. By 7:18 a.m., rain had thinned to a fine gray mist over the inner court, and the secure library lights had shifted from night warmth to morning utility. The nurse removed the heart rate patch and replaced it with a lighter monitor strip for 4-hour observation. Ivy finished half the broth and forced herself through 6 spoonfuls of rice. The body demanded basic terms, even when the mind wanted only strategy. Her phone vibrated against the table. Mama calling. Ivy answered at once and turned slightly away, not to hide the conversation, but to hold it steady. I'm here. Her mother's voice came thin with static and fear. Are you hurt? Wrist only. I'm safe with medical staff and legal counsel. Who did this? Ivy looked at the reinforced glass, at her own reflection layered over gray stone outside. Caleb escalated, He's in custody now. A long silence followed, then the sound of her mother breathing through what might have been a prayer. Come home. I can't go to the apartment yet. They're setting neutral housing. You trust these people? The crux sat there, simple and sharp. Ivy let the question stand for a beat. I trust the paperwork I just signed. I trust witnesses. I trust records. I'm learning the rest. When she ended the call, Matteo was still by the door, one hand resting lightly on the chair back, as if he had chosen that exact posture to take up less force in the room. Distance helped. Distance also made her aware of him in a way she did not want to parse. The controlled stillness, the low voice that cut through noise without volume, the restrained anger he turned into logistics instead of spectacle. Fear had not dissolved. It had changed shape and begun arguing with attraction in a language she did not trust. Elena returned from a side call with a tablet in hand. 2 updates. First, Judge Ferraro approved temporary protective status at 7-Eleven, effective immediately. Second, the financial crimes prosecutor accepted your emergency interview slot for 8 o'clock remote. Recorded, counsel present. Good, Ivy said. Third, Elena added, and her tone tightened. Caleb's attorney filed a request for spousal contact under reconciliation privilege. Ivy stared at her. Denied? Not automatically. Under current law, he can request one monitored conversation if no standing restraining order exists. Your order is temporary and blocks direct contact. But the defense is arguing he needs your statement to contest detention. Anger moved through Ivy so cleanly it steadied her pulse. He needs access to reframe control as concern. Matteo spoke without looking away from Elena. File opposition on coercion history and active witness intimidation. Include the weapon event. Already drafting, Elena said. But a magistrate may still permit a recorded, supervised exchange today. Ivy rose from her chair too quickly and had to brace one palm on the table until the dizziness passed. Matteo took one step forward, then stopped himself before touching her. That restraint landed harder than if he had caught her. I choose the terms, she said, voice low but clear. If there is any conversation, it is on record, with counsel, law enforcement, and no private channel. He does not get my location. He does not get to call me by any personal name. Elena nodded once. I'll submit exactly that. Ivy turned to Matteo. And you stay out of frame unless I ask. His jaw tightened. I do not like that. I know. He will bait you. He has done that for years. Their eyes held. The room fell quiet, except for the muted hum of climate control and a faint radio crackle beyond the closed door. The attraction was there. Undeniable and badly timed. Braided into adrenaline and relief and the dangerous comfort of being seen by someone built for command. The fear was there too, just as real, warning her that power could turn on tone and timing. She spoke first. If you step over me in that room, I walk. Something in his expression shifted, not softer, but more precise. Then I won't step over you. Elena's phone chimed with an incoming secure call request. She checked the screen. Magistrate clerk, they want immediate availability in municipal interview suite B, remote link only, 10-minute window. Ivy looked at the table once, at the signed boundary pages inside clear sleeves, and picked up her copy. We go. The municipal interview suite was inside the East Administrative Wing, 3 doors down from records, with a bolted steel table softened only by 2 neutral lamps and a wall monitor mounted high enough to prevent easy eye contact games. A small camera light glowed red. 2 officers stood at the back, silent. Elena sat at Ivy's right with a legal pad open. Matteo stood outside the frame line as promised, visible only in the reflection of the dark window if someone looked for him. At 8:06 a.m., the screen activated. Caleb appeared from detention holding, still in the same charcoal suit, tie loosened, hair damp at the temples. He had already rebuilt his public face. Concern in the eyebrows, regret at the corners of the mouth. That banker calm he wore when he needed institutions to doubt women faster than men. "Nkem," he began. Ivy lifted one hand. "Use my legal name." A flicker crossed his face. "Ivy, you're exhausted. You sent things in panic. We can fix this if you tell them I came to check on you." Elena leaned to the microphone. "For the record, this communication is monitored under Case File 47-B, initiated by defense request. Any attempt at intimidation terminates the session." Caleb smiled as if she had complimented him. "Counsel, of course. I have nothing to hide." He looked back to Ivy. "You know me. You know I would never hurt you." Ivy felt her heartbeat in her throat, then in her wrists, then settle as she placed both palms flat on the steel table. "At 6:05 this morning, you breached private property, gripped my wrist, and produced a weapon during an active confrontation." "I was afraid," he said smoothly. "Afraid you were being manipulated by men who profit from conflict." From the back wall, one officer made a short note without expression. Caleb leaned closer to his camera. "Come home. Withdraw the complaint. I can settle the debt, all of it. Your mother gets the best clinic. Your brother finishes school. You know I take care of what is mine." The word "mine" hit the room like a contaminant. Ivy heard Matteo shift once outside frame, a subtle scrape of shoe against tile, then stillness again. She kept her gaze on Caleb. "I am not an asset class. I am not collateral. I am not yours." His smile thinned. "Legally, you are my wife. Legally, you obstructed divorce service and forged financial instruments." Her voice gained force with each clause. "You used my signature. You used medical vulnerability. You used delayed filings to create dependency." He dropped the gentle tone. "Watch yourself." Elena said, "Threat language noted." Caleb ignored her. "You think these people will protect you when this becomes expensive? You think he will?" He angled his head toward where Matteo stood out of frame, predatory politeness cracking at the edges. "Men like him don't do charity," Ivy answered before Matteo could speak. "He signed boundaries in front of witnesses. You demanded obedience in private and called it love. That difference is why you're in custody." For a moment, Caleb's face emptied of charm completely, revealing the cold arithmetic underneath. "If I go down, I take your name with me. My name is already mine." She leaned toward the microphone, steady now. "You do not own it. You do not own my body, my files, my address, or my future. Any contact from this point goes through counsel. Any approach outside that path is documented and prosecuted." He laughed once, brittle. "You're repeating lines they fed you." "No," Ivy said. "I wrote these lines years ago. You just never let me say them out loud." At the edge of frame, the magistrate clerk's icon blinked on the monitor, signaling time. Elena requested termination based on escalating coercive language. The officer at back approved with a curt nod and ended the defense channel. Caleb's screen cut to black mid-breath. The silence afterward was dense and ringing. Ivy stared at the dead monitor until the red camera light switched off. Then her shoulders dropped in a small, involuntary collapse that felt less like weakness than release. Matteo entered frame only after the session ended, stopping one arm's length away. His voice was low, roughened by contained rage and something more careful underneath. "He will not get near you again." She met his eyes. "Protection, not possession." "Protection," he said. "With consent. With records." One of the officers approached with a printed session transcript for preliminary signature. Ivy read every line, corrected one misheard phrase from "my wife" to "legally, you are my wife," and initialed the margin. External contact resolved on record, with his words preserved exactly as he had weaponized them. As they stepped into the corridor, Elena took a call and covered the receiver long enough to report. Prosecutor accepted full evidence packet and added emergency fraud freeze motions on the 6 instruments. Hearing request filed for this afternoon. Ivy nodded, exhaustion dragging at her bones, but no longer dragging her backward. Mateo walked beside her without touching, close enough to intervene, far enough to honor the line she had drawn. At the secure library door, he paused and opened it for her. "Sit down," he said quietly. Not as an order now, but as an offer of ground held steady while the next fight lined up outside. Ivy stepped back into the secure library, crossed to the same chair, and sat because her knees still carried the tremor of the interview suite. Mateo remained near the door until she nodded once, then took the seat opposite her, not at the head of the table. The distance between them was deliberate, measured, and it steadied her more than any blanket had. Elena Voss came in with 2 officers and a stack of fresh printouts, the pages still warm from the annex copier. "Immediate outcomes," she said, placing each document in a separate line. "Defense request for spousal contact is terminated after recorded coercive language. Prosecutor filed emergency fraud freeze motions. Municipal unit approved temporary relocation under neutral site protocol. You choose from 3 addresses." Ivy reached for the first page and read every sentence, lips moving silently over each legal term. Mateo waited without interrupting. When she finished, she slid the papers back. "I choose the shortest commute to my mother's clinic, and I need my own lock codes, not shared with estate security." Elena wrote it down. Granted. By 9:40 that morning, the library had turned into a controlled relay point. Belandi Compliance delivered a forensic receipt for every physical item tied to the case. The pistol sealed in a numbered evidence bag and transferred to municipal ballistics. The valet ticket sleeve logged and sent for print and ink analysis. Ivy's burner and regular phone imaged for metadata and returned to her with chain signatures. And the silver ring she had set on the table cataloged as a personal item and offered back without pressure. Ivy took the ring, held it for one breath, then placed it in a small envelope marked for her attorney's archive. The secure line on Elena's tablet lit up. She accepted the call on speaker. A clerk from the Financial Crimes Office confirmed 2 shell lenders had been frozen pending fraud review, and the 6 instruments in Ivy's name were now under contested status. Collection paused by court order. Ivy closed her eyes at that and pressed her thumb hard against the edge of the table to keep from crying in front of strangers. It was not relief yet. It was oxygen. Another call followed from Nora Adebayo, voice clipped and professional through encrypted audio. "Verification complete. I'm holding publication until indictment is unsealed. I'm sending my source map to your counsel only. No media contact goes live with your location attached." "Thank you," Ivy said. Nora paused. "He used 3 intermediaries and 1 charity account to hide transfer pressure. You were right to document early." When the line disconnected, Mateo looked at Ivy, then at Elena. "External contact outcomes are now in writing. Keep copies in 3 locations." "I already have," Ivy said, and almost surprised herself with the steel in her own voice. Near noon, Signora Bellini requested entry and waited at the threshold until Ivy granted it. The older woman carried no tablet this time, only a paper folder and a small tin of ginger biscuits from the kitchen. Her posture was still exact, but the edge in her expression had softened into something closer to accountability. "I owe you information," Bellini said. "At 1:26 this morning, Paolo asked me to approve an unscheduled service lane override. I refused and told him to wait for dual sign-off. He said he would return with paperwork and never did. I should have escalated faster." Ivy watched her carefully. "Why didn't you tell me when I checked out?" Bellini lowered her gaze briefly. "Because I believed it was a protocol breach tied to contraband delivery, not a targeted threat to you. That was my failure." She set the folder down. "This is my statement, signed and notarized. It confirms your timeline and Paolo's request." The loaded look Bellini had worn for weeks finally resolved into plain language. Not contempt, vigilance sharpened by hierarchy, and a mistake she was willing to name. A few minutes later, the security chief entered with Paolo under escort and counsel present, exactly as ordered. Paolo looked 10 years older than he had at midnight, shoulders folded inward, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were pale. He asked to address Ivy directly. Elena asked Ivy first. Ivy agreed. Paolo spoke without theatrics. "Caleb's assistant paid my gambling debt and threatened my daughter's tuition records if I didn't open a 7-second blind on the monitor loop. He said it was only to deliver papers. I knew better. I did it anyway." His voice cracked and steadied. "I am giving full cooperation. Names, account numbers, transfer points. I'm sorry, Miss Okonkwo." Ivy held his gaze and felt anger and pity collide, neither canceling the other. "Your apology is noted," she said. "Your statement matters more." At 3:12 p.m., she sat in Municipal Courtroom C beside Elena while rain tapped the high windows and a clerk adjusted a microphone that squealed once before settling. The hearing was brief and brutally procedural, exactly the kind of room where private terror had to survive public grammar. Caleb appeared by secure video from holding. He tried concern first, then legal entitlement, then wounded dignity. The judge interrupted him twice and asked for records. Elena presented the transcript from the morning interview, the chain logs, and Bellini's sworn statement. The prosecutor added the weapon event, financial coercion evidence, and witness intimidation. When asked if she wished to address the court, Ivy stood. Her wrist still carried faint marks, yellowing now at the edges, and she kept both hands on the podium so the tremor would not show. "He built dependency by design," she said. "He delayed filings, forged signatures, and tied compliance to my mother's medical access. This is not a marital dispute. It is coercive control with financial and physical escalation." The judge looked directly at her. "Requested remedy?" "Permanent no-contact order, contested debt protection, and supervised communication only through counsel for case procedure. No private channels." "Granted pending indictment," the judge said. "Temporary order converts to full protective order effective today." Caleb started to speak. The judge muted his channel. By the second week of November, the case moved to sentencing on a cold morning that smelled of wet wool and courthouse coffee. Ivy arrived from the neutral apartment in a dark coat she had bought secondhand the night before, carrying a folder thick with certified copies because paper had become her armor. Matteo was there but sat 3 rows behind her, as agreed, close enough to step forward, far enough not to occupy her voice. When Caleb was brought in, he avoided looking at her until the prosecutor read the charge sequence in clean, unemotional lines. Financial coercion, fraudulent instrument use, unlawful confinement history, weapons offenses, witness intimidation. His attorney argued stress, misunderstanding, first-time panic. The prosecutor answered with timestamps, transfer ledgers, and recorded words from his own mouth. Ivy gave victim impact testimony standing straight, pulse steady. "You trained me to shrink," she said to the bench, not to Caleb. "I do not live that way anymore." Sentence was entered before noon. Custodial term, restitution process, supervised release restrictions, and a permanent no-contact order with enhanced penalties for third-party approach. Fraud hearings on the 6 debt instruments were set with expedited review under the conviction findings. Central threat closed, in language no private smile could undo. Outside, the rain had finally broken. Pale light caught in courthouse puddles as reporters called questions from behind barriers. Nora stood near the back with a recorder lowered, met Ivy's eyes once, and did not push forward. She had kept her word. That night, Ivy unlocked the door of the secure apartment she had selected herself. Second floor, narrow balcony, view of a pharmacy sign and a bus stop she could reach in 4 minutes. Her mother slept in the back room after evening dialysis, and Chima sat at the kitchen table with economics notes spread around 2 empty tea mugs. He looked up when she entered, searched her face, then stood and held her for 1 quiet second before returning to his books as if normal life were a task he could protect by continuing. At 12:08 a.m., a discreet knock sounded. Ivy checked the peephole first, then the side cameras she had installed that afternoon. Mateo stood in the hall in a dark coat, alone, holding a small brass keyring and a sealed envelope. She opened the door but kept the chain on. "Why are you here this late?" "To close open items." He lifted the envelope. "Final evidence disposition receipts. 1 copy for you, 1 for counsel, and this." He held up the keys. "Gate and unit overrides linked to your apartment security panel. Yours, not mine." Ivy unlatched the chain and let him in. Her old hard-shell suitcase stood by the entry wall, still packed from habit, handle extended like a reflex she had not unlearned. Mateo looked at it, then at her. "You can keep it there," he said. "Prepared is not the same as afraid." He placed the keys in her palm and closed her fingers around them. No pressure, no claim, just transfer. They moved to the small kitchen table where the overhead bulb hummed softly, and the city bus hissed at the curb below. Ivy opened the envelope, checking each page. Pistol ballistics filed, ticket print analysis complete. Paolo's cooperation agreement entered, journalist hold note logged, prosecutor acknowledgement archived, court orders certified. Every thread that had once floated like loose wire was now tied to a record, a date, a signature. She looked up. What happens now? Mateo rested both hands on the chair back across from her, waiting until she nodded before he sat. "Now you sleep in a place you chose. Tomorrow your mother goes to clinic transport under protected routing. Next week your debt hearings begin with fraud presumptions already entered. My role is available, not imposed." Ivy let that settle. Outside, the street light painted a thin gold line across the floor tiles and touched the suitcase shell by the door. He met her eyes, voice low and steady. "Sit down, Ivy." She already was, but this time she stayed. Keys warm in her hand, the gate between danger and home finally locked from her side.